Kayla's boots clanged against the metallic rubble as she darted through the half-collapsed corridors of the Zyphron Prime marketplace. Sparks danced from exposed conduits overhead, casting jittery shadows across her hooded face and long, sensitive ears, which twitched at every sound. She paused for a fraction of a second, sniffing the acrid air as if she could detect danger the way humans smelled rain. A distant crash echoed through the abandoned sector, and Kayla rolled her eyes. Marauders again. She had half a mind to wave and yell hello, they were so predictable. Her ears, delicate and almost absurdly long for a humanoid, flicked behind her, picking up the faint hum of engines. The sound was oddly comforting, though she suspected anything that hummed in a war-torn sector could explode without warning. Kayla ducked behind a rusted trade kiosk, peering out at the approaching figures. 3 scavengers, armor patched together like a child's messy art project, weapons that probably hadn't been inspected since the last galactic solar storm. One of them carried what looked like a toaster bolted to a rifle, and Kayla suppressed a laugh. Of all the ways she might die today, a toast-shooting marauder seemed almost charming. Before she could formulate an escape, a distant roar split the air and the ground vibrated beneath her boots. Kayla froze. She'd heard that sound before, utterly terrifying, yet oddly familiar to anyone who had spent a week in a failing starport. A fighter barrel rolled over the ruined skyline, its hull patched with mismatched plating and a faint smell of burnt coffee drifting behind it. The ship wobbled in the air like a tipsy dancer, and Kayla blinked. The pilot leaned out the cockpit window and waved. "Missed me?" he yelled, a grin plastered across his face that made Kayla want to hit him for being cheerful at a time like this. "I'm Jaren, and yes, I know my flying is terrifying, but have you ever tried controlling a ship that thinks it's allergic to fuel?" Kayla's ears flicked in irritation and disbelief. She could hear her own heartbeat in the rhythm of the hum around her, and yet the human pilot seemed to treat impending death like a casual inconvenience. She ducked again as the scavengers aimed, their toaster guns sputtering and coughing sparks. Jaren's ship fired wildly and beautifully, scattering plasma bolts in every direction. One bolt hit the nearest marauder's improvised armor, and Kayla's jaw dropped. It toasted a piece of bread that was inexplicably taped to his chest. The marauder screamed and the bread flew like a comet. Kayla had to cover her mouth to stop herself from laughing. By the time she leapt aboard Jaren's ship, it was wobbling dangerously near a collapsing scaffold, and she stumbled into the cockpit, her hood falling back and revealing the long sweep of her ears, which Jaren immediately gawked at. "Wow," he said, eyes wide. "Those are impressive. Are they like universal radar or more like fashion statements?" Kayla growled, swatting at him with a hand that narrowly missed his shoulder. "They're very sensitive," she hissed, though she couldn't keep the edge out of her voice. "I don't need commentary, thank you." Jaren laughed, pressing buttons that made the ship groan as if it were alive. "Sensitive ears, huh? Bet you can hear me thinking about breakfast, or maybe the next explosion. I like to keep my passengers alert." Kayla rolled her eyes so hard her ears nearly twitched into a knot. She noticed a blinking console labeled AI Sarcastica, which chirped in a deadpan voice, "Alert, you call this navigation? I call it reckless endangerment with style points." Jaren saluted the AI, "Thanks, Sarcastica. I aim to impress." Kayla smirked despite herself. The ship lurched violently as plasma fire from the scavengers tore past, missing them by mere meters. Kayla held onto the edge of a console for balance. "Your flying is unconventional," she said carefully, trying not to sound terrified. Jaren grinned. "Unconventional is my middle name. Actually, it's Theodore, but who remembers that? Survival is about style." Kayla let out a short laugh, a sound she hadn't made in weeks, and her ears twitched in amusement. They barreled through the ruined market, narrowly avoiding collapsing pillars and floating crates. Kayla pointed to a tunnel ahead. "We can lose them there. It's narrower, your ship can't fit without." She hesitated. "Wait, how do you even?" "Science," Jaren shouted, as if that explained everything. The ship compressed like it was alive, panels folding inward with a series of groans and pops, scraping past walls by mere centimeters. Kayla pressed herself against the console, gripping it so hard her knuckles went white, and whispered under her breath, "This human is insane." "Insane, absolutely," Jaren yelled back, dodging another volley of plasma, "but charming, right? Nobody's laughing at the apocalypse like me." Kayla laughed again, her ears flicking with the sound, and realized she hadn't felt this alive, or this ridiculous, since before the war stripped everything familiar from the galaxy. As they finally emerged from the wreckage, the scavengers were left behind, their toaster guns smoldering and useless. Kayla slumped into the co-pilot's seat, finally catching her breath. "You're lucky," she said, not entirely serious, "that I like crazy humans with terrible piloting skills." Jaren leaned back, his grin a permanent fixture. "Lucky you, ha, I think we're both lucky. You with your radar fashion statements and me with my natural charm, we make a perfect team." Kayla raised an eyebrow, ears twitching. "Perfect, don't push it." The ship hummed through the dim glow of warp space lanes, dodging floating debris and distant war remnants. Kayla watched the lights flicker across the panels and thought, for the first time in months, that maybe survival didn't have to be about hiding in shadows. Maybe it could involve a reckless human, a sarcastic AI, and a little bit of ridiculous humor to balance the danger. She wasn't safe yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time she had a companion who made the galaxy feel a little less hopeless and a lot more absurdly entertaining. Her ears twitched as she realized she was grinning. Jaren looked over, noticed, and winked. "See, I knew you'd like the ride." Kayla's laughter echoed through the cockpit as the stars stretched into lines, warp lanes carrying them into uncertain adventures, and somewhere deep inside, the tiniest flicker of hope began to grow. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor plates, a steady pulse that seemed to mock the chaos of the galaxy outside. Kayla leaned back in her seat, ears flicking with every subtle vibration, as Jaren wrestled with the controls like a man arguing with a stubborn toaster. "You do realize," she said carefully, "that warp lanes aren't supposed to look like spaghetti after a blender accident." Jaren's grin was infuriatingly cheerful. "That's warp lane artistry. Only the boldest navigators get to appreciate the patterns." He flicked switches with theatrical flair, and the ship groaned in protest, panels bending and flexing as if trying to whisper, "I told you so." Kayla shot a glance at the AI console. "Sarcastica, do you have anything to add?" "Artistry," the AI drawled, its tone so dry it could have evaporated moisture. "Yes, because nearly colliding with a space freighter is the new renaissance." Kayla couldn't suppress a short laugh, and even Jaren chuckled. It was a small victory, the kind that made the endless dangers feel just a little less suffocating. "All right," she said, eyes narrowing, "what's our actual plan? Running through wrecked sectors and hoping marauders have better hobbies isn't strategy." Jaren leaned back in his seat, propping one foot on the dashboard. "Survival strategy, Kayla. Survive first, plan later, and maybe make a few jokes along the way." Kayla twitched her ears, already sensing the incoming sarcasm in his words, and she suppressed a groan. Humans, she thought, were entirely too relaxed about near-death experiences. The first test came sooner than she expected. A fleet of scavenger drones, sleek and triangular, rose from the shadow of a dead planet's rings. They hummed and clicked, scanners glowing like judgmental eyes. "Great," Kayla muttered, "mechanical predators with a flair for dramatic entrances." Jaren yanked the throttle, sending the ship into a series of spins and corkscrews that made Kayla's stomach lurch. "I call this maneuver the Dizzy Comet," he announced proudly. "Guaranteed to confuse drones and annoy anyone with a weak stomach." Kayla clutched the armrest, ears flattening as a volley of plasma bolts zipped past. One grazed the hull, leaving a sizzling streak. "You're insane," she shouted over the alarms. "Absolutely insane." "I prefer the term creatively reckless," Jaren said, ducking as another plasma blast ricocheted. "And trust me, it works." Kayla narrowed her eyes, realizing it did work barely. She tapped her ear tips, sending subtle signals into the environment, detecting energy fluctuations in the drone's flight patterns. "Left flank 2 drones are out of sync." "Wait for my mark." Jaren raised an eyebrow, amused. "I like it when you talk space eavesdropper, it makes me sound smarter by association." Kayla didn't answer, instead sliding a finger across the navigation console. A hidden energy pulse she had detected surged, and 2 drones collided spectacularly. Sparks rained down like neon fireworks, and Jaren whooped. "See, that's teamwork." Kayla rolled her eyes but allowed herself a small grin. The victory was short-lived. An urgent message crackled through the comms, a voice trembling with fear and static. "This is the Rhinoxian colony. We've been seized by warlord forces. Need immediate extraction, please, anyone." the transmission cut off abruptly. Kayla's ears twitched, sensing the desperation behind the broken words. "We can't ignore that," she said immediately, tone sharp. "Those people have no one else. We can get them out, but it'll be dangerous." Jaren rubbed his chin, pretending to ponder deeply. "Dangerous, my favorite type of adventure, plus I've got the perfect outfit for heroics." He tapped the side of his head with a grin that made Kayla want to smack him. "Heroic pilot hat, optional but essential for morale." Kayla sighed, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her amusement. "Fine," she said, "but we do it my way, stealth and observation first. No dramatic heroics, Jaren." "Stealth," he mocked, "that's not really my style. I specialize in flamboyant chaos." Kayla groaned. "This is why I don't trust humans with delicate operations." By the time they approached the warlord-controlled colony, Kayla's ears were alive with the subtle hums of energy shields, the faint vibrations of patrol drones, and even the tiny creaks of the building supports from far below. She guided the ship through a series of narrow canyons, each turn requiring precise timing that made Jaren's eyebrows dance with surprise. "You're like a space cat with radar," he said, eyes wide. "Do your ears always do that, or is this a special occasion?" Kayla pinched the bridge of her nose. "Special occasion is the galaxy not blowing up beneath us." Her ears twitched involuntarily as she monitored the colony's defensive layout. 2 guards by the main gate, drones patrolling 3 levels up, and an energy net that cycles every 12 seconds. "We can slip through, but only if you actually listen for once." Jaren's hands froze over the controls. "Listen. Did you just ask me to pay attention? Dangerous but exciting. I can try." Kayla allowed herself a smirk. "Try, Jaren, that's all I ask." The first phase went smoothly. Kayla guided them past patrols, each narrow miss punctuated by Jaren's commentary. "I think that drone just waved at me," he whispered. Kayla's ears twitched. The drone had nearly detected them. "It did not wave at you," she muttered. "It wants to vaporize you." Jaren shrugged. "Well, I waved back anyway." Inside the colony, Kayla's ears picked up faint whispers from trapped civilians. She led them through maintenance tunnels, using energy pulses to bypass locks, and even found herself chuckling when a group of frightened colonists mistook Jaren's dramatic fall over a maintenance pipe for part of the rescue plan. "He's part of the entertainment," Kayla whispered to a small boy, who giggled and pointed at Jaren, tangled in cables. The climax of the chapter arrived when the warlord's forces detected movement and launched an immediate counterattack. Kayla tapped into the facility's energy grid, creating diversions with sparks and flickering lights. Jaren, of course, tried to take credit. "See, I planned that dazzling display." Kayla's ears twitched in disbelief. "You broke half the conduit." "Artistic license?" he protested, as lasers and plasma bolts flew past them. Kayla's focus never wavered. Her ears detected every movement, every pulse of energy, and she guided their escape with precision that made Jaren's reckless maneuvers actually work in tandem with her. They emerged into the open, the colonists cheering despite their exhaustion. As the ship lifted off, Jaren turned to Kayla, brushing soot from his jacket. "See, we're heroes, flamboyant, slightly insane heroes." Kayla's lips twitched. "Don't push it," she said, though her ears twitched in amusement. She realized she had never laughed like this during a mission, not truly, and the sound was liberating. Hovering above the colony, she watched the tiny figures waving goodbye, and her ears twitched involuntarily with pride. Maybe survival wasn't just about evading death. Maybe it could be about helping others, laughing at chaos, and sharing the ridiculous burden of hope with someone who seemed completely incapable of seriousness, yet somehow perfect for the task. Jaren, noticing her thoughtful silence, leaned against the console. "You know, I think we're getting good at this partnership thing. Maybe we should add capes next time." Kayla blinked. "Capes, really?" "Absolutely heroic flair. Everyone loves capes," he said, striking a pose that made her ears twitch in disbelief. Kayla laughed, the sound genuine, her long ears flicking with amusement as the stars stretched into the warp lanes, carrying them toward the next impossible adventure together. The alarms blared before Kayla could even sip the recycled space coffee that Jaren insisted on keeping warm despite its suspicious aftertaste. Her ears twitched violently, detecting subtle vibrations in the ship's hull, the faint pulse of energy signatures that meant they were not alone. "Jaren," she said sharply, "we've got company." a big angry fleet-sized company. Jaren grinned, one hand lazily spinning a control knob. Company, perfect. I like large social gatherings, very lively, very combustible. Kayla shot him a look that could have fried a starship's sensors. You are entirely incapable of seriousness. I prefer creative optimism, he said, leaning back as the ship lurched violently, dodging incoming plasma arcs that carved swaths through nearby asteroid fields. Kayla's ears flattened in irritation, and perhaps a little amusement, because somehow Jaren's reckless piloting worked. The enemies were fast, precise, and entirely too polite for what Kayla considered polite combat, but they underestimated the combination of human chaos and alien intuition. Kayla tapped her ear tips against the console, sending low-frequency pulses into the surrounding space. She detected gaps in the Warlord fleet's formation, weak points in shield synchronization, and a suspicious energy spike near a floating cargo cluster. Jaren, follow my lead, trust me on this, and no theatrics, she added with a stern glance. No theatrics? He asked, pretending to clutch his chest in shock. That's like asking a nebula not to sparkle, impossible. Kayla groaned but ignored him, concentrating on the delicate ballet of energy pulses and evasive maneuvers. They weaved through the battle like a pair of improbable dancers. Kayla's ears picked up the faintest whine of an incoming stealth drone. Jaren's hands jerked, sending the ship into a spin that made her stomach lurch. That spin nearly gave me whiplash, she muttered. It also confused the drone, he replied cheerfully, so win-win. The real challenge emerged when the Warlord deployed a massive command ship, its hull glowing with deadly energy and its weapons swiveling with terrifying precision. That, Kayla said quietly, ears twitching, is going to be problematic. Jaren leaned forward with exaggerated heroics, pressing buttons at random. Problematic is my middle name. Well, technically it's Theodore, but who's counting? Kayla smirked despite herself. You're insane. Creative optimism? He insisted. Kayla focused, sending precise pulses through the energy grid, manipulating shield frequencies to create temporary gaps. Go left now and duck. The ship twisted, narrowly avoiding a volley that could have vaporized them. Jaren yelled with exhilaration, best ride ever. Using Kayla's guidance, they infiltrated the command ship's perimeter. The interior was a labyrinth of pulsing corridors, automated defenses, and soldiers who didn't appreciate the unexpected intrusion. Kayla's long ears picked up subtle energy fluctuations, detecting patterns in the turret's firing sequences. We can disable the main grid if we create a feedback loop from the reactor core, she whispered. Grid feedback loop, Jaren repeated, pretending to sound intelligent. Check, I totally understand. Kayla pinched the bridge of her nose. You do not understand, just follow my instructions and try not to explode. Inside the reactor chamber, chaos reigned. Jaren fumbled with the controls, wires sparking and the ship's AI commenting. I've seen toddlers operate machinery with more finesse. Kayla, despite herself, smiled. She guided him through the sequence, their combined efforts forcing the reactor to pulse and overload the command ship's systems. Sirens blared, lights flickered, and the enemy fleet lost cohesion, giving them the upper hand. Amid the turmoil, Kayla realized something that had been growing quietly during their journey. She had relied on humans for survival before, but never trusted one so completely. Jaren's unpredictability, his humor, his chaotic bravery, he had shifted from a wild card to an essential partner. And she, in turn, had learned to share her knowledge, to communicate, and to allow herself the ridiculous pleasure of companionship and laughter amid the apocalypse. The final escape was almost anticlimactic after the storm of battle. The command ship systems collapsed, sending it tumbling into the nearest asteroid field. Kayla and Jaren zipped through the debris, the ship squealing in protest as if it had never been treated to so much chaos. I think we just made history, Jaren said, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. Kayla let herself smile genuinely, ears flicking in amusement. You have a very loose definition of history, she said. Creative optimism. Jaren countered, I prefer to think of it as legendary mischief. They returned to the liberated colony, where grateful civilians waved and cheered despite their exhaustion. Kayla felt a warmth she hadn't expected, a quiet pride in seeing people saved, in knowing that her abilities, her unique senses, her instincts had made a real difference. She glanced at Jaren, who was bowing theatrically to the crowd, and her ears twitched involuntarily in amusement. He's ridiculous, she murmured. And you love it, the AI chimed unhelpfully. Kayla smirked. Perhaps. The colony's leaders approached, offering thanks, resources, and even the faintest hope for rebuilding. Kayla realized the galaxy was vast, dangerous, and often absurd, but now she had a partner she could trust, a companion with whom she could face the chaos and even laugh at it. As the stars stretched into warp lanes on the journey back, Kayla allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had been doomed once, trapped in the shadows of a galaxy that saw her kind as expendable. But now she was alive, triumphant in small victories, and profoundly changed. She had learned trust, humor, and courage in ways she hadn't expected. And she had learned to allow herself the absurd joy of surviving alongside someone who made chaos feel almost like home. Jaren glanced at her with his infuriating grin. So, adventure tomorrow. Kayla's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. Tomorrow we survive, maybe with fewer explosions. Fewer explosions. He gasped, mock horror in his voice. Blasphemy, that's not heroism. Kayla laughed, her long ears flicking with amusement as the ship sailed through the warp lanes, leaving